Hello, everyone, and welcome to Connecting the Dots. I'm Ignacio Rivera, your host, and I'm here with.
Hari Ziyad, and I am the writer of a new book out named Black Boy Out of Time. Originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and I moved to New York about 10 years ago. I'm also the editor in chief of a publication called Race Baiter, which covers topics race, gender, sexuality from an abolitionist perspective. And I'm really excited to be here with you, Ignacio.
Yeah, me too. I'm so happy. So, just to give a little background, Hari was probably one of the first advisory board members that I had on the Heal Project when I first started. What was it, 5 years ago or something like that? Um, and I was just saying to Hari that why don't I know them better? After reading the book, I was like, oh my goodness, so many shared experiences. The writing was just beautiful. Experiences in New York around, gender queerness. Oh, so many beautiful stories. You're a wonderful storyteller, and I really, really enjoyed. I say reading it, but I think the goddess that it was on Audibles because I have a chronic migraines, and sometimes, well, most times I can't read, so it really bothers my head. So I was happy that it was on Audibles, and I got to listen to it while driving, and it was just I just consumed it, right? So I got questions for you, and so I just wanted to share
Ready.
my experience of listening to it. Um, so just the I want to know, what was your experience in writing this, because this is your memoir, or a memoir, I should say, right? And how did that feel? How long did it take?
Yeah, so we started about 3 years ago now. Like the process of working with my agent to put together the pitch,
Mhm.
and like start figuring out what the book would actually look like. And then we sold it to publishers around the summer of that year, so about 2.5 years ago. And then
Mm.
that's when I started writing. For nonfiction books, you usually can sell the book based on just like a couple of chapters and a general
Right.
like, outline. And so I started putting the book together about 2.5 years ago. And it changed so many times over the course of those 2.5 years. I mean, it was always a story about, growing up Black and queer, and me and my relationship with my family, and what it was like to grow up in a Hindu family with my mother, with 18 siblings. And it was always about what I learned about the carceral state and prison culture through that experience. But about halfway through writing the book, my mother was diagnosed with a pretty rare and aggressive
Mm.
cancer. And that is around the time when the book started shifting to more of like a healing process. Um,
Hmm.
I mean, I always wanted and always know that abolition is a healing process, but
Right.
I really had to put those thoughts and ideas into practice in actually writing the book. So that's when I started to do the self-epistolary chapters. Um,
Hmm.
the half of the book is written to my younger self, and
I love that. I loved it. That conversation you were having with your younger self. Because in listening to the book, you're not visually seeing it. So when it started off with your name, I realized quickly this conversation, this beautiful conversation that just evolved throughout the book. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. That's my favorite part of the book too, and so I'm so glad that it evolved in the way that it did, and became what it became. And I think I got so much more out of it when that element was added to it. So yeah, but it was also difficult. There were lots of conversations that not only I was having with myself that I never had before, but that I was having with family, and particularly my
Hmm.
mother. And before she passed away in November, which was its own crazy thing to deal with while you're writing a book. So yeah, it
Right.
was a lot of like ups and downs. It's a roller coaster for sure. But overall, it was a very healing, and I felt like such a weight off my shoulder when I finished it.
Mm.
And in particular, those conversations that I had with my mother, they were a long time coming. Like I needed to have them, and so it was good to finally have that avenue to do that,
Mm.
and to reconcile some of the things that we needed to reconcile.
Mm. It's like I believe that like any creative process, whether you're writing a play or writing a book or a poem about uh, our life or trauma or things that we've experienced, that in itself is healing. Like just I'm sure just writing the book, I think it would have probably evolved in that way anyway, because the way you do it seems natural. Like you can't. It's almost like you can't talk about the carceral system and then not talk about the healing that has to go along with like just understanding how deeply it's woven into the life. And you do that so beautifully by just showing little instances of your life and how that tiny instance connects to such a larger piece of what you're talking about today. And I love that because it makes it much more digestible to people to understand this giant idea of abolition, right? The scary thing that people don't know how to, yeah, it sounds good, but, and in the book, you also say, like, the one thing that people often say is, what about the murderers and the rapists, right? And so trying to like grapple with understanding as Black people that the police don't do shit for us, and what do we do as Black people? How do we take care of one another?
Right.
And the back and forth with the younger self and your adult self. And I have to say, the story about the young boy, I forget his name, when you were younger, the big bulking, the way you described him,
Virtual.
um, oh, Roberto, that just hit me right in my heart. You talking about like how you saw him and described him and how you realized that that was also contributing, right? And
Mhm.
so, and even going back to Roberto, and in comparison to things that were happening later on, you can see that pattern, that connection. And I was like, this piece of work, Boy Out of Time, to me is a deep introspective look into your life and the mapping of anti-blackness, like the ideas of abolition and um, misafropedia, which I want you to talk about. And you plot that very nicely to give a really very vibrant, sometimes sad, but very real picture of that.
Mhm.
And I thank you for that.
Thank you for like that reading. I've been having so many conversations with like white folks recently about the book, just, like as part of the uh, promotion and launch of the book. And that level of depth that you were able to read in the book is so refreshing that is what resonated with you, because it's not always read the same way um,
Mm.
by by other folks.
Yes, I purposely did not read or look at any interviews because I did not want to hear the questions people ask you or what they've said about it. I wanted to just come fresh with my own feelings about it.
I, I mean, don't get me wrong. I've had really great interviews too with a lot of like Black queer folks, but just recently I've had a lot of this is a story about how terrible it was to be Black and queer, like how much trauma you
Mm.
experienced, and just like focusing. So
Yes.
thank you for reading it carefully. I didn't expect anything else, but I know that this will be a much more fulfilling conversation.
And it's like it's intense, like I think that what some white people might be getting out of it is that yeah, it's intense, but I think as a Black person reading this text, you're like, yeah, yeah, got it. Yeah, I had a similar experience. Yeah, yeah, that's
Right,
fucked up. Oh, that happened to me. I didn't get the connection. Yes. Now it's almost like, yep, and a white person's like, oh my God, I didn't even have a clue how bad it was. But the shitty thing about it, that even though it is bad in a lot of big ways, we navigated and managed through that,
right,
and that's another piece of it that you talk about. You talk about the hardship, but it's the layers of complexities, right? It's like your Mata and a Mother Boomy, like the complexities of the mental illness and the meanness, but also the walks and it's like this is the thing I think as Black people that we have to talk about, the complexities, because if we don't understand that, we can never get to abolition. We can never get to understanding that because we're not one dimensional. And
Exactly.
you break that down. You break that down. You're like, it's here, it's here, it's here. This is, I'm not just this. I'm also this, 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 and this. And all of the ways that this affects me and others.
Exactly. Yeah. We don't live binary lives. And
Right.
that goes for our trauma, it goes for our joys. And that is exactly what I was trying to communicate with this book. It was of the full complexity. Because I had to do work to be able to acknowledge just how deep some of that shit is.
Mm-hmm.
But that doing that work to acknowledge that also brought me to new depths of joy, and new
Yes.
of wholeness. So, yeah, thank you for that.
Yes. I say the healing process, which is a continual one. The healing process it's like so fucking hard. And at the same time, it's so, I mean, for lack of a better word, it's so enlightening.
Mm,
It really is enlightening because another piece that you do, which I think any person who is really trying to think about who they are in this world and how they contribute to the world and so forth and so on is really going to be doing introspective work, but also like placing themselves right in the work that they're thinking about. And in the book you also do this, right? And so it's not just talking about sexism, homophobia, all of these fucked up things that are happening to Black people. And then you're like, yeah, and I live in this. And this is the way that it rubbed off on me and how I perpetrated this. And now I'm seeing this, as I learn, as I educate myself, you're showing the journey, and you name specific things, as, causing hurt or causing harm, even when others said, no, I didn't see that as harm, right? Because you're seeing it as a much bigger, in a much bigger context, right? And that's the point. These are not tiny, tiny little experiences all by themselves that they collectively make up anti-Blackness. They collectively make up, the prison and industrial complex, the carceral system, all of that.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah. I yeah, I really appreciate and just love when people have the ability to take accountability for stuff, because we talk a good game of accountability, and we don't often show what that actually looks like, and it's hard. It's really hard to do it, especially when it's not the the most fun thing to do when you're owning up to some shit, right?
Right.
But that's the piece of it, right? It's the healing piece, it's the acknowledging the harm, it's the working through it. And to me, this is, I think, when we talk about work at the Heal Project, this is, for me, it connects so much to, again, how we relate to one another, right? It's all about how we relate. And I love that you start with your family in the beginning of the book and you end talking about your family. I think that's really important because I often say that our families are our first, non-consensual relationship that we have to navigate. We don't have a choice in that shit. We're there, and we don't, nobody asked us. We're there, and so now we got to figure it out. And so through figuring out that non-consensual relationship, you learn about how you relate to others. Either
Mm,
you accept it or you are, debunking it. You're like asking questions about it. And if you do, then you're, at that point you might be a problem, right? You are the kid who stirs up stuff, and
right.
it's not fun to be that person. It's not fun.
Right, right. Yeah. Unless, I mean, they're doing that work too, which hopefully eventually
Mhm.
you can call them in to do that work too. But yeah, it's not fun when you, especially when you're a child, and we live in this world that doesn't give children
Mhm.
the right to question things in that way.
Exactly.
And so
Yeah.
it's a lot of you go through a lot of shit when you do, and then hopefully you have a family that's going to work with you. And so even though
Yeah.
all of the shit that we went through as a family, I can say that, and that's why it felt so right to start with and end with them, is that they were on every stage, we were doing this work together.
That's
And
great.
sometimes it was my mother hurting me, and sometimes I was harming my mother, and we were all figuring this out, how to, and we were all committed to trying to do less harm, even though we didn't always have the same idea of what harm was.
Right.
Um, and so I think that taught me a lot of like what family could be too. Even my chosen types of families, was experiencing that, and experiencing this collective buy-in to like a collective healing process that's
Yes.
messy, that doesn't always feel good, that sometimes you want to run from. Which I spent a long portion of my life like, I'm not dealing with these people anymore. And sometimes that's valid. But I think there's going to always be a point where, you have to do some of that uncomfortable work too. And so I'm really grateful that, especially for my mother, like that she did a lot of work throughout the process of working with me on this book. Um, I shared all of the stories that she was mentioning with her beforehand, and we like had conversations around it. And I'm just really grateful that she was able to sit with me. She didn't agree with everything, as you can imagine,
Right.
but she's like, "This is your story, and I want you to tell it." And so, yeah, I hope to be that parent for someone else. So, and right now, working on being that parent for my inner child. But I learned a lot of it from my mother, even though I learned a lot of horrible things from her too. But I learned that in specific from her, which is I'm just blessed to have experienced that.
That's beautiful that you got to like work with your mom through the process before she crossed over. That's beautiful. Yeah, that you got to do that work because sometimes we don't get to do that with our families. It's like
Yeah,
the longest process of journeying and healing with our adoptive or blood families. It's difficult, but that's
yeah,
really good. One of the things I wanted to ask, I want you to talk to me about misafropedia, which is a term that you coin in the book, and tell us where it comes from. And yeah.
yeah. So misafropedia is, based on the root word misopedia, which is means the hatred or oppression or disdain of children, which isn't commonly used even in like the white world, even though, the way we treat children, I think, is, and you talk about this a lot. That, I mean, uh, the basis of your work is that childhood sexual assault is related to all of these oppressive systems. So misafropedia, though, is specifically how, the oppression of children is manifested within Black childhood. And I came up with that just because there wasn't this language. And I was inspired by, Moya Bailey's creation of the term misogynoir, and how
Right.
that helped to push forward a lot of conversations around how sexism and anti-Blackness interact around the experiences of Black women.
Right.
And I was hoping to have a similar term that would be useful throughout this work that I'm doing, because I was trying to locate all of these carceral systems around childhood experiences, because I believe wholeheartedly that that's where it all starts. And I think that, and the way that we heal through them is to name it there, and to be intentional about, how we deal with children, and Black children in particular. I don't like necessarily the phrase coining it, because it is rooted in all of these ideas that are already out there. Um, and I definitely don't see myself as like the first person who's ever talked about this. But I needed this term. I need to bring those ideas together in order
Right.
to write this book, because, so much of it centralized around this idea that Black childhood is a very specific experience. And it does a very specific thing in particular to our relationships with ourselves as adults, like
Yes.
removing us from that childhood part of ourselves is a systematic process that starts as soon as we're put out into the world. And healing that and doing the inner child work that it takes to heal that takes a particular lens. Like, it's not the same type of inner child work that white people are doing. All of these other systems.
Yes.
It's not the same.
Whatchamacallit, yes, we just finished doing a social media campaign, and we were talking about the intersections of sexual violence and anti-Blackness, and one of the things we posted about was the adultification of Black children, especially Black girls, but I would say the same for Black boys too. This idea that they are grown, and you even talk in the book about, girls look that they're fast. I heard that all my life. It's like girls are hot, spicy, fast, and never question others. And so that was the term was really good because it really did help bring together, because we were talking about adultification, but it wasn't really specific to Black children, although Black children really experience that a lot.
Right.
So I'm gonna be using the term. So what? How can people support your book? Where are you going to be talking about the book anytime soon? New projects?
Yeah, you can find the book anywhere that you buy books online. I always suggest to buy it through your local bookstores, even if they're not carrying it. Usually, if you request it, they can either order it in, and that will also get it on their radar. So definitely do that, and you're supporting them instead of Amazon. And you can find links to where to buy books other than that on my website at hariziyad.com. You can also find all of my upcoming events.
I'm thinking two things. I know the answer to this, but why is this book important for, let's say, maybe parents to probably read and talk to their young teenagers, their children about? How is this book related to possibly like educating children and prevention?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a central part of the book that talks about just how widespread sexual violence is across communities of children, but in particular with queer children, in particular with trans children, in particular with Black children. And so I think what we've done, or we've been pressured to do, is to create a taboo around sexual violence. And like, I know that for some people, it's that like, if we don't talk about it or mention it, it's not real. But we know that it is, and it's real on such a level that children are going to be exposed to it, even if it's just the fact that, one of my friends experienced this, because statistically, that's how prevalent it is. And so I think it's really important that we acknowledge the realities that children are living through, and not to put the burden on them to try and work their way through that, but for us to offer whatever supports that we can. We need to be able to open up lines of communication with children to talk about those experiences. So as a survivor of sexual violence, I know that I felt like I didn't have that room to talk to anyone about. I didn't know how widespread this thing was, even though there were people I knew that experienced this. And I didn't know that it wasn't my fault. And I think what this book does, or what I hope it does, is to allow us to challenge our ideas about blame, guilt, and shame. Because I think that is ultimately one of the most damaging effects of experiencing something like this in childhood, is you carry that for such a long time. Even when you've done work to challenge it, like there's still things that I'm working through and healing through. And so I hope that this book offers us avenues to challenge that, to stop thinking about sexual violence with the shame attached to it, and to stop putting that shame onto to children and their desire to talk about it and to talk about their sexual agency as well.
Yes, yes, and also I really do like you know, you talking about the not this idea, this monster idea, you know, that people who do harm are monsters, which contributes to the throwaway culture, which contributes to, you know, calling the police and throwing someone in jail, and which contributes to this idea of it's okay if that person gets stabbed, killed, or raped in prison. So it's this cycle. And I see, you know, you, especially for people who maybe have never thought about this, a white person maybe reading this, you know, that you really get to see those layers and to see that it's not bullshit. You know, like this stuff that we talk about isn't bullshit. Like we're not pulling it out the crack of our asses. Like it's real, and you really plot that out throughout your life, and talking about um, even within the harm, that there is still healing for everyone, that there's a vision for that possibility, rather than throwing people away, which mostly tends to be more Black people, right?
Right.
So this consistent cycle. I feel like this book has a lot of beautiful gems for teaching moments, many things. You talk about lots of different topics, and I think that they can be broken up and have great conversations with young people about this, and really talking about the ways in which just the way you felt, the way you talk about your feelings, your emotions, how
Mm-hmm.
you felt within that was really powerful. You know, just uh, having the opportunity to express those things, and with the introspection, because you're doing it in such a way that you're thinking back, but you're also thinking in that child mind, and then you're also thinking back in retrospect, and so it's a lot of beautiful ways you kind of view this. And I really enjoyed listening to it. Thank you so much. And you're a fantastic, wonderful writer. And we need to get together. We need to get to know each other a little more, because
Yes,
I
we
feel
do.
like I connected with you so much in this book. I totally just connected with so many of the ideas that you had, and the stories that you shared. So thank you for your vulnerability and sharing your story with everyone. Yeah, thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you for having me and for this wonderful and your amazing questions. I really appreciated that.
Oh, thank you. Well, thanks everyone, and we will see you next time on Connecting the Dots. Bye.